Listeners, listener discretion advised.
Section 202.
From MAST Radio in Philadelphia, this is Shakespearial. One story week by week. I'm Erica Montague. We're at episode 2. You probably heard episode 1 on MAST Radio or on our YouTube channel, but if you haven't, stop. Go back to the beginning. We're telling this story in order. The story of Banquo Allen, a man who died in a car accident in 1997. The story of Beth Stewart, found dead in 2003. And the story of Mackenzie Stewart, Beth's husband and Banquo's best friend, and, according to some, their murderer. So to pick up where we left off last episode, you heard how Mackenzie was brought to trial for Beth's death in 2004 with little evidence and no real way to directly link him to what the prosecution called murder. And the motive the state supplied, the basis for the whole thing, was that Mac was most likely responsible for the death of Banquo, so he was obviously guilty of murdering his wife. Prosecutor Reagan Richards told the jury in her opening statement, Mackenzie Stewart killed Banquo Allen and clearly is capable of murder. He is capable of killing, so of course he is capable of killing his wife, Elizabeth Stewart. This man is a terrible and violent character. Or this, from closing. You have seen throughout this trial that Mackenzie Stewart is a person with evil in his heart, a person who eliminates problems instead of working through them, a person who cares for no one but himself and caused not only the death of his best friend, but also the death of his own wife.
But what makes someone good or bad?
I think it's like how you treat other people, like the way you treat people and like children.
Are you saying children aren't people?
No, stop. You know what I meant.
I don't think children are people.
See, that's like someone who is bad or evil. He doesn't think children are people, but no. What I meant was like the way you treat someone with compassion or empathy or whatever, that's the big difference in good or bad.
But I don't think people are all good or all bad.
Okay, so explain what you mean by that.
I just mean, I think humans are more complicated than that. I think we are good and bad. I think good people can do bad things and the opposite.
Yeah, and bad people can do good things, right?
I don't know. I think some people are just all good or all bad. Some people are just like pure evil.
But what was Banquo's death really about? And what was Mac's relationship with him really like? Was Mac just pure evil? If he did sabotage Banquo's car, like Fleance and others believe, what could have driven Mac to kill his best friend and, quite possibly, his best friend's young son? That's what I'm trying to find out in today's episode, by talking to people who knew Mac and Banquo, but also by talking to some true crime enthusiasts that Fleance knows. Women who've spent years researching and analyzing these strange events. Another information I have to go on is Beth's own words about the friendship, because I have a copy of her diary. It was entered into evidence at trial. It was read by so many people, cops, prosecutors, even Mackenzie himself. What's remarkable about the diary is that it covers such a large span of years, but not in any consistent way. The first entry is October 23rd, 1977, right around the time that Beth and Mac started going out. And the last entry is dated October 20th, 2003, about 2 weeks before she first went missing. She skips years without writing anything, and then will write daily entries for weeks straight before stopping again. There is a manic sense to her diary, but it reveals so much about the relationship between all three of them, Beth, Mac, and Banquo. It was almost impossible to find anything negative about Banquo. Everyone I talked to only had great things to say about him. He was kind, he was smart, he was funny, he was always helping people out, and he was always with Mac. Even in Beth's diary, she writes about Banquo. Here's an entry from 1978.
Banquo is the most loving soul, and I'm so glad he's Mackie's best friend. I mean, who else would pull all those strings to get Mac on the football team, when anyone with working eyes can see that Mac does not belong on a football field? Of course, my chucklehead's ego was too big to understand that he's no athlete, and he whined about not being starting quarterback with Banquo. I mean, Banquo has known Mac for like ever, but after Mackie and I started dating, Banquo wasn't petty with me at all. You would think that if a girl shows up out of nowhere and is now spending all this time with your best friend, you would start hating her. But Banquo isn't like that at all. When we all study in the library, he helps with algebra, and Mac with basically everything. Banquo is an angel. That's what he is.
And here's another one, much later, after Banquo and Judith's wedding in 1989.
I know I haven't written anything in a while, but yesterday was such a momentous occasion, I just had to write it down. Banquo and Judith got married. The wedding was amazing, bodacious, fantastic. Words can't even start to describe how I felt. My tears sure did. I was a complete mess. I even started crying when Judith walked down the aisle. But how could I not? She was the most beautiful bride. Maybe even more beautiful than I was. Mackie started choking up when reading his best man speech. At the reception, we danced and ate so much food. My head still hurts and my body's aching from last night, but it was worth it. When am I ever going to have another chance to watch my best friends get married? They're starting a new chapter, and Mac and I will always be there with them, no matter what happens.
There's really only one thing Beth writes about that casts Banquo in a negative light, at least according to Beth. When she and Mac found out that they couldn't have children, she writes in an entry from 1993.
We told Judith and Banquo at dinner tonight. I cried. So did Judith. Mac showed nothing, like usual, but Banquo ignored it and kept eating. Said it was all for the best, that things were predetermined, and that this was our path. I talked with Mac on the way home about it. He says I shouldn't be so upset, but what does he know? He's so dumb sometimes. Ugh. I shouldn't say that. I love him so much, but he doesn't get why I feel so sad all the time now. I just want him to let me be angry and sad and stop defending his friend instead of seeing how I feel about it. Whatever. I'll sleep on it and maybe I'll feel okay in the morning. Stop being so emotional, Elizabeth.
She stops writing after this entry for almost 4 years, and the next time she writes is after the car accident that kills Banquo.
Banquo, dead. Fleance an orphan, but not coming to us like he should. Going to his cousins. Mac is devastated. I'm just numb. How could this happen? How could he do this and not tell me? My sweet boy.
See, that right there is Banquo changing his will. She isn't asking how could Mackenzie do this, like killing Banquo, but how could Banquo change his will and make someone else the legal guardian of Fleance? She thought of him as her own child.
Section 213.
I think it's time to introduce you to the trio that has done years of research on this case to try and piece together what happened to Banquo Allen, but more importantly, why it happened. I'll let them explain who they are and what they do.
We didn't know anything about this case when it first happened. Agatha and I, we aren't from the area, and it didn't make national news until later when the wife went missing, and it became a heated topic online. We actually met through the message boards because I posted a theory I was working on, and Agatha and Mary started commenting with ideas that helped the theory. We realized that we all had the same thoughts about the case, so we started talking outside of the message board, and eventually created our blog, Toil and Trouble.
I have to admit, I've always been a big follower of certain trials and cases. I lived in California during the Manson trials in the 70s, and I went to try and get a seat to watch this trial. I was just so fascinated by it. Not by him, he's horrible, but by the idea of evil and what causes people to do terrible things.
So what we did, this blog was to compile everything we could find about Mackenzie Stewart to try and prove that he killed not only his wife, but also Banquo Allen in the 90s. That car accident wasn't an accident. It was intentional. It was murder.
We've since changed some of that opinion given evidence that came out about Beth Stewart's death during her husband's appeal. We now do not think he killed his wife directly, but we continue to fight for justice for the murder and attempted murder of Banquo and Fleance Allen. Mackenzie Stewart is guilty, and we won't stop fighting until everyone knows.
I still think he had something to do with Beth's death.
I said not directly responsible, Mary. We all know how you feel about her death.
Jane, Agatha, and Mary asked that we not use their real names for this podcast, but use the names they blog under for their website. It seems a little ironic that they value their privacy so much, but have no issue publishing information about the private lives of Mac and Beth, things that weren't part of the trial, and things that don't necessarily need to be shared to prove their theories. But I wanted to talk with them and learn more about their discoveries and what they think happened that day in 1997. Fleance found their blog when he started looking for more information about his father's death online about 10 years ago. I expressed some surprise that it took him that long to take an interest in it, but he kindly reminded me that his childhood had been one trauma after another, not necessarily the type of childhood you want to reminisce about. Malcolm and Desmond, the family members who took him in, had tried to shield him from the stories and gossip, but eventually his curiosity got the best of him, and the more he read into the accident, the more he came to think that there was foul play involved.
Okay, so when I was like 5 years old, my dad and I were involved in a car crash. You hear the reports say it was an accident. It wasn't. I'm sure of it.
Right, you mentioned that in the email. Could you elaborate on that a little more? I guess, describe the accident if you can.
Yeah, sure. So we were on our way to baseball practice. My dad loved that I played baseball. He used to play sports in high school. I guess he was hoping that he'd pass that down to me. Not the skill, but the hobby. Like a bonding father-son sort of thing. I wasn't any good, if you were wondering. I hit the ball maybe twice, and that's being generous. But he still cheered me on, even when I missed. It made him proud. I made him proud. At least he better be proud of me. All that embarrassment for nothing? I'm joking. I know he was proud of me.
A lot of my conversations with Fleance went in one of two directions. Dark humor, which is clearly a way he deals with his traumatic childhood, or distracted reminiscing. I wasn't bothered by it, but I did feel bad trying to get him back on topic.
So, the accident. We were driving down East Market Street, I think? Yeah, East Market Street in York County. We were both born in the county, and we lived near there. East Market was a common way to go from one place to another. It still is, obviously. It's a really dangerous road, actually. Anyway, the tires blew out, and he lost control of the car, and we spun, I think, 3 lanes over into oncoming traffic. He died, obviously, on impact. He wanted to go out with a bang, you know? A big way. He didn't want death like how most people do. Most want to die in their sleep. He wanted a distinct difference between life and death, but I don't think he meant go out with a bang, literally. I know he was dead basically the second the car stopped. Talk about dramatic exit. I felt really guilty, which is stupid because I was 5 years old. How is it my fault? I was a snot-eating gremlin. But yeah, it hit hard. Little kids, they can't comprehend death in the same way adults can, especially not parental death. My mom, Judith, died when I was a baby. Breast cancer, caught it late, it spread, all that jazz. I guess you could say my parents really had a desire to have a damaged child. Luckily, they left behind a decent inheritance so I could afford a good therapist. I think they had a pact or something. I think in their wedding vows, they said, hey, honey, let's have a child and traumatize them with our deaths. Oh, but let's give them money for therapy. What kind of parents would we be if we at least didn't give them that? But yeah, I woke up that day excited for baseball practice and ready to meet my teachers. We had orientation at Warwick Elementary, where I went to school later that day. Then I fell asleep freshly orphaned. You know what they say, carpe diem. On that diem, death carpe'd my dad.
I did warn you about the dark humor part of things. I don't think I ever got used to it through the hours I spent talking with Fleance. Jane, Mary, and Agatha seem to find it hilarious, though, so maybe you will too. The theory that the trio has put together over the years starts with Banquo being meticulous with everything in his life, including regular maintenance on his car, which ramped up after Fleance was born. The idea that 2 tires would come off of the car while he was driving seems far-fetched when you consider that he'd just taken his car in for inspection 3 weeks prior. To refresh your memory, let's quickly revisit the accident. Banquo and Fleance were driving when 2 of the tires came off of the car. The car spun out of control across several lanes of traffic before flipping and hitting a telephone pole. By the time emergency responders arrived, part of the car had caught on fire, and Fleance had to be pulled out through the back window. Firefighters were able to put out the small fire, but Banquo was pronounced dead at the scene. It was discovered that the bolts had come off of the tires, causing the accident. Sounds suspicious? You wouldn't be the only person to think that. But remember that police ruled it an accident, and even after the anonymous letter was published accusing Mac of the crime, it never went anywhere. To get into details, I want you to hear from Agatha, Mary, and Jane directly about their theory. I have to admit, they make a pretty convincing case. Because the trio live in different parts of the country, and parts of this podcast were recorded after the start of COVID-19 pandemic shutdowns, we had to have conversations over conference calls and video chats. So the quality isn't always great. I'll try to clear up any audio issues as they arise.
We started with the accident report that was in the public records because something just didn't seem right about it. Obviously, the letter was the first part of all this. I know for me personally, the letter was what got me interested in the case. Without it, I'm not so sure I would have gone so deep into it.
Same here. I don't live in the area, so I never would have seen anything about the accident on the news or in the papers. It was the letter and the subsequent dismissal and denial from the police that made it explode on the message boards. But it did take almost a year for it to get to that level. Locally, I know people were all over the case, but it was almost a year after the letter that I got involved with it.
Exactly, and this was in the late 90s, so the message boards were not like you're used to today. It really did start small and then just got bigger and bigger until you had groups of people doing research and forensic testing and publishing their findings online in this crime collective.
See, I'm from the area, well, enough of the area. I'm not from York directly, but the accident was on my local news, and I had this gut feeling that it wasn't an accident. Seeing the car on its side, wrapped around the pole, knowing there had been a young child in the car, it just felt like there was something evil going on.
That's the woman that goes by Mary. She's 40, the youngest of the trio, and was only 17 when the car accident happened in 1997. Because she was from the area, like she said, this case was something like an obsession for her.
I had just gone to Home Depot across the street from the accident a few weeks back to get gardening supplies. I was right there. How could you not want to know what really happened, basically right in your backyard? I remember the letter being published in the paper. I was in high school, and we used to get a few copies of the local newspaper in the cafeteria each morning before homework. Even the teachers were trying to find copies to see that letter, straight up confiscating it from the students just so they could have a copy to read. It was a huge debacle, and for a while it seemed like everybody was speculating, but interest dropped off after a few months with most of my students.
And for you?
I'm talking about it with you over 20 years later, so you tell me.
Yeah, I guess that's true. What brought you into this case, Agatha?
Obviously, I'm the oldie of the group. I've dabbled in the community for decades now. The true crime community, I should say, not the York community. I'm from California, so I didn't know anything about this case when it was happening in real time. But when Mackenzie was arrested for Beth's murder, the message boards went crazy for this guy. And not just Beth's death, but also Banquo's. I actually saw a post that Jane made where she outlined why she believed Beth's death was not the murder, but Banquo's was. This was before the appeal, obviously, and it was a pretty unpopular opinion at the time. I mean, Jane, people were furious at you for that post.
Yeah, it was intense. I firmly believe that Mac is responsible for Banquo's death, but even then, I didn't think that he killed Beth. Most people in the community thought he was guilty of both, so I got a lot of hate for my theory.
Jane is another local, in a way. She lives in New Jersey, but her sister lives in New York and mentioned the accident in a letter to her one day when they were chatting on the phone. Jane asked her to send the newspaper clipping out of curiosity, and her fascination with the case spiraled from there.
Super cool.
Section 224.
Can you walk us through the post you made and the evidence you put together?
Yeah, absolutely. It's basically the main point of our entire blog. I started by cataloging the evidence I could find to try and make sense of the situation, and certain things started to stand out to me. At first, the main evidence was the letter itself, obviously, but that led me to look into Banquo and his car. I actually called around to find the mechanic that took care of Banquo's car. It took multiple phone calls to get the right place, and found out that his last inspection was July 29th, only 3 weeks before the accident. That seems suspicious to me, that the car had just been checked out and passed inspection.
And then 2 tires just suddenly fly off. It doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. And it felt like the letter was right about that part. It had to be sabotage.
The police called it a freak accident, but come on, that's not a freak accident. Tires don't just randomly fall off cars, especially not well-maintained and recently inspected cars.
And I did make sure it was a reputable place where he went for the inspection. And it is. Good reviews, no issues on record that I could find, so again, not likely that they could have missed something like that. And remember, the letter pretty clearly named Mac as the person who sabotaged the car. So the next step for me was looking for evidence that could connect him to the crime. I didn't have the strongest explanation, but I did put out a theory that he used a wrench or some other tool he could have gotten from Beth's job at the hardware store. He definitely wasn't the handy type, but he could have easily bought or borrowed something from the store and loosened the bolts on the tires. It would be simple.
And that was where I come in. Jane posted the theory online, and I figured the next step would be to try and find out what people had to say about Mac and Banquo and even Beth. Since I live in the area, I just went around the neighborhood knocking on doors and asking people if they knew anything or saw anything.
You are so young and enthusiastic. That sounds so exhausting.
It was, because most people thought I was crazy and would shut the door in my face. It makes sense. Here's this youngish woman asking too many questions. I understood it, but I'm still glad I did it because I was able to talk to the neighbor.
Whose neighbor? Beth and Mac or Banquo's?
Banquo's neighbor. I also talked to Mac's neighbor, but that guy, he was a lot to take in, and his stories didn't match up so much. But Banquo's neighbor had a critical piece of information that he shared with me. He was convinced he had seen someone in the driveway that night before the accident. He couldn't see their face, but there was definitely a person by the car in Banquo's driveway.
So Mary added that to the theory, that there had been someone by the car the night before. It's logical to think that the person seen was also the person who messed with the tires. Luckily, the street where Banquo lived had a gas station and a convenience store that kept security footage.
And that was my next step. Going to the gas station, asking about the security footage. It took some convincing. I started to put a spell on the guy working, hypnotize him practically, but he agreed to make a copy of the tape for me to bring home. It's really low quality, but you can see a shadow of a person kneeling down next to the car. It doesn't prove it's Mackenzie Stewart, and it doesn't even prove that the person was trying to sabotage the car, but it definitely adds more layers to the theory.
And that's really what it is. The police didn't investigate the accident as crime, big mistake overall, but also problematic for us trying to piece it together. There just isn't even physical evidence because nothing was collected. So all we have to go on is pretty circumstantial evidence, unfortunately.
But I think it's important to look at the circumstantial evidence, especially surrounding Mac and Beth leading up to the car accident and their behavior after the accident happened. And of course, once Beth died and Mac went to trial, there were things from that case that seemed to fit with explaining the car accident.
One of the things that the trio and Fleance have pointed out is one of the interrogations of Mac after Beth's body was found. The interrogation starts normally, with officers H.T. Brooker and Antonio McDuff establishing the time and place of the interrogation, and Mac casually answers questions about his wife, their relationship, and what happened in the days leading up to her disappearance. We will play some of that for you in a later episode, because much of the interrogation was played at trial. But what the trio is particularly interested in, and I have to admit, I find it fascinating as well, is what happens toward the end of the first interrogation. Listen and see what you think about the shift in questioning and Mac's response to it.
When did fights like this happen before?
After a few years of being married, we decided we wanted children, but we were unable to conceive. Beth somehow thought it was my fault, and after a huge screaming match, she left and stayed at a hotel for a couple of days.
Wow, you guys are a piece of work.
Settle, man. So, Mac, let's talk about the days after Beth went missing. So you were claiming that you were at work on the 31st, the 1st, and the 2nd, correct?
I already told you that. Yes. Why do you keep asking the same questions over and over again? You asked me this when she was just missing, and we reported her as missing. Stop accusing me of killing my wife. She's someone I didn't kill.
No one is accusing you of killing your wife, Mac. We are trying to figure out what happened to her.
But what about Banquo, your best friend? Where were you when he died? Where was Beth?
Don't accuse me of killing my best friend. I didn't kill my best friend.
I never said you killed them. I'm just asking you where you were. Where was Beth when it happened? Tell us the truth.
He's here. What are you doing to me? Why are you doing this? How are you doing this?
Doing what? Who is here, Mac?
You're dead. Why are you here? Why are you looking at me like that? Stop it! Stop pointing at me. Don't shake your head at me.
He's yelling at the mirror, but the only person reflected in it is him. Something seems very wrong. Maybe we need to call all this off and get somebody in to evaluate him.
No, look at him. He's breaking. We can get the truth from him. We just have to keep pushing. Mackenzie, can you tell us what you're seeing and who you're talking to?
It's Mac! How many times do I have to tell all of you?
Mac, calm down. We need some help in here.
We all know, even by now, that Mac had a temper. He clearly hated being called Mackenzie, but when the detectives bring up the car accident that killed Banquo, he flies into a rage and then something strange happens. I'll let the trio outline their theories on this moment.
This is going to sound absolutely Looney Tunes, but I think he's seeing Banquo. Well, not seeing him exactly, but a hallucination of some kind, or just his mind playing tricks on him. He starts talking to someone who isn't there, at least according to what the detectives are saying to each other while Mac is screaming. They're confused by his actions, claiming he's yelling at his own reflection in the mirror.
And the tape is shut off after what sounds like something smashed or glass breaking. The notes from the detectives about his first interrogation just say, "The interview was abruptly ended for the safety of all parties." But it doesn't explain what happened at all.
I'm not a doctor, but I think that psychologically, Mac is breaking here. This is guilt coming out. This is his repressed feelings about the death of his best friend coming up. He knows what he did. He knows he's responsible. And his subconscious is trying to get him to face what he did.
I don't disagree with you that something is happening here with Mac, but do you really think he's seeing Banquo, hallucinating things? That seems like a stretch.
Well, there's more. Not from the interrogation, but from Mac's own videos he posted years later after his appeal and after he got out of prison.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Mac started his own series of vlogs after his release, things really ripping into the court system and the prison industrial complex, and he had some followers at first.
I honestly didn't hate some of his messages. I didn't disagree with some of his main complaints about the system, really.
Yeah, no, it was like that at first, but then he really went off the deep end. Real conspiracy-type videos, like the far reaches of the internet-style videos. They get somewhat scary, and you can really tell something is not right with him. He doesn't confess to anything outright, but there are moments where it feels like he's about to admit he tried to kill Banquo. Reading between the lines, looking at the big picture, it really feels obvious what he's talking about.
I'm going to play you 2 clips from Mac's video series. One from the beginning, where he sounds angry but not irrational, and one towards the end, when he seems seriously not stable.
Hey everyone, it's June 17th, 2011, and I'm back with another video about my experience with going to jail for a crime I didn't commit. You might know me from the media if you're local, but if you don't, I was found guilty of murdering my wife with no physical evidence, all based on a corrupt medical examiner and police department. I want to highlight today some of the people that helped me get a new trial and helped me finally be found innocent.
See? Fairly normal. Pretty sane. Here's one from September 24th, 2013.
I think someone's watching me. I can't get rid of this being watched feeling, and it makes me sick. It makes me sick, and I swear I'm not insane, but something is off. I can't really explain it, but I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy, but I think Banquo isn't dead? He's supposed to be dead, but I saw him in here. I think whoever's watching me is going to hurt me. I think that person is Banquo, but he's dead, right? He's dead. He's dead. Beth's dead too. You know what this is? This is all just a big revenge plot. He's not dead, and he wants to kill me because I deserve it. I'm innocent, I swear, but I didn't kill Beth. I didn't kill Beth, and I don't deserve this torture.
Mackenzie was clearly being haunted in some way, and I think he was having extreme visual hallucinations, especially the way he describes his paranoia. He is generally frightened that Banquo is coming back to harm him in some way.
Or Beth.
Yes, or Beth. I don't know what I believe about ghosts or even the afterlife, but Mac seemed to feel like dead people were watching him, knowing what he did.
Plus, we're pretty sure Beth knew that Mac killed Banquo. I mean, the letter.
Beth wrote the letter. I'm sorry. I just think this part of the theory is so fascinating, and even if it's just speculation.
Tell me about the letter theory.
We think Beth wrote the letter, and some of us think Beth was in love with Banquo and Mac couldn't handle it.
Not all of us think that. I don't think anything was going on with the two of them. I think Beth really just loved the sense of family she got from taking care of Fleance more after Judith died.
It does make sense on some level. Even the cops questioned it after Beth's death that something had gone on. I know, the diary would have said something about it and it wasn't in there. I just think it's a clear motive.
I don't think they were having an affair. I really don't. Mac might not have been the best husband, but Banquo was Mac's best friend first. I just don't see it happening.
So what do you think was the motive?
I think there are a few options. One is money. Banquo's will originally named Mac and Beth as Fleance's guardians and his benefactors. If he died and Fleance lived, they got to adopt Fleance and get the money. If they both died, then they got the money. What Mac didn't realize is that Banquo changed his will. They got nothing after his death. Beth realized her husband had killed Banquo, almost killed Fleance, and her way of dealing with it was to send that letter.
The name was a clue for us. Beth was a real Jane Austen fan, and the name Austen Bennett just screams Pride and Prejudice. I would know. I selected my trio name because I'm a huge fan of Jane Austen.
The style also fits with some of Beth's later diary entries, some of her writings from school, and the way she spoke during her last few years alive, during her therapy sessions, and other recordings we have. Mac wouldn't have recognized it, which was probably part of her plan, but it seems clear that Beth is the only one who could have written that letter. She knew, and she couldn't handle it.
Did Beth write the infamous letter? Did she suspect her husband of foul play and of attempting to kill his best friend? How much of this led to Beth's own death by her own hand, and Mac's time in jail for her murder? I hope you will join us as we explore the deaths of Beth and Banquo in this season of Shakespearial. Until next time.
Shakespearial is brought to you by MAST Radio in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Thanks to our sponsors, the Living Shakespeare Society, the Counseling Department at MAST, and our producer, Bill Shakes. Remember, this podcast is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. See you next week.